Hello, I'm so glad to welcome you to our new lecture. In this lecture, I will show you how to share harmony between bassoon and flute. The modern concert flute in C is a non-reed instrument which has a professional player's range from B3 to D7. Flute is a non-transposing instrument. It is a rhythm and the sounding range is the same. Only the treble clef is used. There are two kinds of flute model, American and European. The European model has a range from C4 to D7, but an American model's range starts from B3 due to its extended key. As you don't know what kind of flute is used in the orchestra, don't write B3 in the flute path. Hence, the safe range for the common orchestral writing is from C4 to C7. Above the C7, all notes are difficult to play and risky for orchestral writing. Only professional players can play these high notes. The top note of this instrument is indefinite. Let's start analyzing the flute registers. Here's a list of the flute registers in various books by master instructors. As I said, each instructor has its own approach about the flute registers, but my lectures are based on Korsakov's registers because it's very easy to learn. A graphical scheme is adapted from Korsakov's book. The blue line shows the thickness of the flute sound quality. The flute low register, which I showed this as one, is from B3 to G sharp 4 or from C4 to G sharp 4, depending on flute model. This register has a very thick and warm sound quality. Unlike other woodwind instruments, its first register is also soft like the second one. As it ascends, the thickness is gradually lost. The middle register starts from A4 and goes to G sharp 5. The number 2 indicates the middle register. Here the tones are soft and sweet. This is one of the most effective registers for chord voicing. The number 3 indicates the high register of the flute, which is from A5 to G sharp 6. In this register, quality of the tones gradually becomes more thin than the middle register. But here the tones are not penetrating like oboe and bassoon. That's why I don't show this with a sharp arrow. Very high register of the flute from A6 to C7, indicated by the number 4, has a quite thinner and a whistling sound quality. But this instrument is not piercing like the very high registers of reed instruments. Depending on the instrument and the player's skills, the top note of this instrument is indefinite. As I said, in writing for the orchestra, it is dangerous to exceed the upper C7. The gray line shows the natural power of the sound. As the flute moves towards the end of the range, it gains strength. The bottom fifth of the flute is quite weak. It is nicely balanced if all other instruments are played with soft dynamics. I will explain it on examples. Ascending from B3 to high, every note sounds stronger than the previous one. This is a native character of the flute, regardless of the player and dynamic marking. Let's discuss how to write true dynamic markings for this instrument. The true forte is possible approximately from G4 to C7 because the flute cannot produce loud dynamics in the low register. You should be aware that if these notes are written at forte dynamic, the actual performance will be softer than the indicated dynamics. Of course, this dynamic can be found in many scores, but they are just the relative dynamics, which means players should play as loud as possible. Any notes between G4 and A6 can be played at true Mezzo Forte dynamic. But the notes below the G4 and above the A6 are quite difficult to produce at Mezzo Forte. Hence I showed it with dashed lines. True pianissimo, piano, mezzo piano dynamics are possible from B3 to A6. Because above the A6 all notes are difficult to attack and sustain as soft dynamics. That's why I'm calling they as relative dynamics. I will explain all possibilities at true and relative dynamics. Now you know where the flute is weak and where it's strong. Let's share the triad between flute and the bassoon. As we know, flute has a cold tone color. Bassoon has a warm tone color. Since bassoon and the flute used in the chord, we will get close mixed timbre. F major chord in close position. The second bassoon takes the F in the second register, which has a soft timbre. The first bassoon plays the A in the second register. So both instruments are equal to each other and quite soft. The first flute plays the C at the beginning of the first register, which is rather thick and soft. One question: what do you think? Does the thick sound of the flute make this chord unbalanced? Not, of course. Because the second soft register of the bassoon is equal to the first thick register of the flute. They have the same soft sounding. Now look at the gray lines. As you can see, bassoons have a medium power. They are roughly equal to each other. But the flute is in weak register. Be careful, this chord will sound balanced if soft dynamics are used. Don't write strong dynamics like forte, fortissimo, otherwise bassoons will prevail over the flute and you will get poor and unbalanced voicing. Why bassoons will dominate? Let's write forte dynamic for this chord and see what happens. Two bassoons will play at true forte dynamic. As you know from our previous lessons, that the notes which are in the bassoon's second register can be played with dynamics such as pianissimo, piano, mezzo forte, and forte. So, the dynamic forte, shown below the bassoon part, is true. What about the flute? Flute cannot play at forte dynamic in the first register. This is impossible. The maximum dynamic a player can achieve can only be a little bit stronger than mezzo piano. So bassoons are true, but the flute is false. Hence, this chord is unbalanced at forte dynamic and should be avoided. Let's discuss about the mezzo forte. Since the bassoons can achieve mezzo forte, it will be true dynamic. But the flute cannot play a true mezzo forte dynamic in the low register, because the maximum dynamics a player can achieve can only be slightly stronger than mezzo piano. So bassoons play at true, but the flute at relative dynamic. Hence, this chord is poor balance at mezzo forte dynamic. This problem can be solved by the conductor as follows. To achieve equal balance in live performance, the conductor will reduce the dynamic on all instruments. The flute and the two bassoons will play around the mezzo piano. Consequently, the mezzo forte dynamics, which is written at the score, can be called as relative dynamics. If this chord is written at soft dynamics, nice balance can be achieved. For example, mezzo piano dynamic. Since all instruments can play at mezzo piano, these dynamics can be called as true. Hence, this chord is nicely balanced. Of course, you can also write piano and the pianissimo, as both instruments can achieve these dynamics. At the end of this topic, we can come to this conclusion. If flute is in the first register, soft dynamics should be used in the voicing. Don't write loud dynamics such as forte, fortissimo. Mezzo forte will be relative. The next chord is A minor in open position. The A note is roughly equal to the E, since it's at the end of the first register. The E note will be played by the first bassoon in the soft and medium power register. The C note is in the thick and weak register of the flute. If you want to get the balance, don't write loudest dynamics. Let's remind excellent verse by master instructor Walter Piston. The tones of the first half octave, especially the foot joint notes, have a warm, velvety quality of their own. The sound is deceptively heavy when heard alone, but it is easily covered by other instruments and by strong overtones from low bass notes. This is due, no doubt, to the weakness of the upper partials in the formant of the low register of the flute. Let's understand what the master teacher means. The blue notes are the fundamental tones of the low register played by the performer. When the performer starts playing, you hear the fundamental tone first. But as I talked in Introduction to Chord Voicing lecture, there are a lot of partials appear above the fundamental, which sound simultaneously. Thus, these partials reinforce the fundamental tone. But because of the flute's construction, these partials are less audible. This is why low registers sound weaker than the other register of the flute. Especially the foot joint notes B3, C4, C#4 are quite weak against the other notes of the flute. Now you know why the low register sounds weaker than the other register. When the flute register used together lower instrument, it's easily covered by strong harmonics from the low bass notes. For example, let's compare two different notes played on different instruments. Flute plays the C4, bassoon, contrabassoon, contrabass. As we know, the harmonics of the flute that appear above the C4 are rather weak. Since the harmonics of C4 are quite weak, it's easily covered by strong harmonics from the low bass notes. If replaced with an oboe, since the harmonics of the C4 are quite strong, harmonics which come from the low bass notes don't cover them. Now, do you understand what the master teacher means? This problem doesn't occur only in chord voicing. Composers also face this problem when writing for the flute solo. The same principles should be followed for the flute solo writing. Let's see what's the approach of master instructor Peter Alexander Lawrence. For the flute to be heard, the supporting orchestral ensembles are usually written 2 dynamic levels below the flute path. So, if the flute solo is at forte, the supporting ensembles will either be written at Mezzo Forte, which is 1 dynamic level less, or Mezzo Piano, 2 dynamic levels less. When the flute is written in lower register for a live performance, the bass line in traditional symphonic literature is usually handled by the cellos, since the overtones from the basses tend to cover the flute in the low register. Note, however, that this situation is avoided all the time in modern recording, since the flute can be isolated on tape. These are valuable information in orchestration. Let's check how these rules work in the scores. The melody is played by the flute player at Mezzo Forte dynamic. As you can see, for the flute to be heard, the supporting orchestral ensembles, contrabasses, cellos, violas, violins, and 2 clarinets are written 3 dynamic levels below the flute path. Now we know how to write dynamics if the flute is in low register. So, back to our lesson. In our case, bassoons are not dangerous as they are around the soft register. Thus, this chord will be balanced since the soft dynamics are used. Don't write strong dynamics. The Mezzo Forte will be relative as all instruments will play at Mezzo Piano. Let's move to the next chord. B flat major is in close position. The second bassoon takes the B flat at the end of the second register. This tone has a delicate timbre and medium power. The first bassoon plays the D note at the beginning of the third register. This tone also has a delicate timbre and weak power. First flute plays the F note in the first register. This is thick and soft sound. If we compare the thickness and power level of these instruments, we can see that only D note can be dominant due to its thin quality. To get the well balance, would be better to replace it by the second flute. No doubt, this voicing better than the first one. Let's analyze. Since the thin sound was replaced by the thick one, we got the same thickness between the three instruments. Now all tones are about the same thickness. There are no thin or powerful instruments. Thus, all instruments are roughly equal to each other and are quite soft. Let's check how these rules work in the scores. This example is from the Mother Goose Suite by Maurice Ravel. The melody is presented as a chordal texture by the first bassoon and two flutes. The dynamic marking is pianissimo. For getting equal balance and soft sound, Ravel used one bassoon and two flutes as softest dynamic. So, back to our lesson. The B-flat major chord is nicely balanced and works with all true and relative dynamics. Don't write loudest dynamics. Let's check the other chords. The C major chord in close position. The G note is soft and weak due to its weak partials. The C note is also soft and weak. The E note, played by the first bassoon, is also weak. But this note is problematic due to its piercing quality. Bassoon's piercing sound dominates from the D-sharp 4 to F5. As I said, flute is weak in the lower register due to its poor harmonics. Since the E note has a thin and piercing harmonics, it can easily cover the flute weak partials. I want to show you a simple method how to quickly share the chord either between two bassoons and one flute, or one bassoon and two flutes. Hope this helps you understand clearly. Open and close three-part harmony can be played by either two bassoons and one flute, or one bassoon and two flutes, with the exception of some situations. When at least two of the following three situations occurs at the same time, one bassoon and the two flutes must be used in voicing. If the top note of the chord is in the first register of the flute, if the middle note of the chord is in the third or fourth register of the bassoon, if the low note of the chord is between D sharp 4 and the F5 range of the bassoon. Otherwise, the middle note of the chord played by the first bassoon will dominate over the flute soft sound due to its penetrating quality. This graphical scheme is based on books and to my own experience, which I have learned from various scores. I will show this on an example. Let's voice the B augmented chord. The top note of the chord always should be played on flute. The top note, G, is in the first register of the flute. The middle note, D sharp, is in the third register of the bassoon. The B, which is the low note of the chord, is not between the D sharp 4 and the F5 range of the bassoon. As you can see, at least two of the following three situations occur at the same time. So, I should use just one voicing, one bassoon and two flutes. This chord should be voiced as soft dynamics. As you know, flute cannot play at loudest dynamics in the low register. Hence, don't write strong dynamics. Let's make one more chord. C sus2. The G note is in the first register of the flute. The D, which is the middle note of the chord, is in the third register of the bassoon. The C, which is the low note of the chord, is not between the D sharp 4 and the F5 range of the bassoon. Since at least two of the following three situations occur at the same time, I should use just one bassoon and two flutes. This chord should also be voiced as soft dynamics. Don't write strong dynamics. The next chord is G5, D in the root. The D note is in the second register of the flute. The middle note, G, is in the third register of the bassoon. D, which is the low note of the chord, is in below the D sharp 4 and F5 range of the bassoon. Since only one of the following three situations occurs in the chord, you can use either two bassoons and one flute, or one bassoon and two flutes. Did you understand why we can use both types of voicing? Because the top note of the chord is far away from the first register of the flute. Since the D note is in the strong register of the flute, two bassoons cannot prevail over it. What about the dynamics? Since all instruments are suitable, we can use pianissimo, piano, mezzo forte, and the forte dynamics. If compare both voicings, the second will be more soft, as all instruments are approximately in a soft register. The D diminished chord. The A flat is in the first register of the flute. The F note is in the third register of the bassoon. The D, which is the low note of the chord, is in below the D sharp 4 and the F5 range of the bassoon. Since at least two of the following three situations occur at the same time, I should use just one bassoon and two flutes. This chord should be voiced at soft dynamics, because the middle note of the chord cannot be played at loudest dynamics. So, don't write strong dynamics. Let's make one more chord. The next chord is G minor in open position. B flat is in the second register of the flute. The middle note, D, is in the third register of the bassoon. The G, which is the low note of the chord, is out of the D sharp 4 and the F5 range of the bassoon. Since only one of the following three situations occurs in the chord, you can use either two bassoons and one flute, or one bassoon and two flutes. Both type of voicing is quite soft and works well. What about the dynamics? The first voicing can be used at pianissimo, piano, mezzo forte, and the forte dynamics. The second one should be used with soft dynamics, since the D4 cannot achieve at strong dynamics. One more chord. F major is in close position. The top note, C, is out of the first register of the flute. The middle note, A, is in the third register of the bassoon. The F, which is the low note of the chord, is between the D sharp 4 and F5 range of the bassoon. As you can see, at least two of the following three situations occur at the same time. So I should use just one voicing, one bassoon and two flutes. This chord can be voiced with either soft or strong dynamics. I hope this graphic will help you how to voice the next chords. So, let's back to the C major chord. After this one, I will ask you one question. Hope you can find it. Thus, this chord will be nicely balanced if the soft dynamics are used. Let's make one more chord. The D minor chord is in the closed position. What do you think? Which of these voicings is more suitable? Let's look at the PDF file and try to find. Both one can be used. In the first example, D and A notes are in the soft and the sweet registers. But the F note played by the first bassoon is quite piercing against the soft registers. This voicing can be used since the flute is in the safe register, but is less desirable. Look at the second example. The D note is in the delicate range of the bassoon. F and A notes played by two flutes are also soft. Since all instruments have roughly the same thickness and power, it will be more suitable. The strong dynamics should be avoided. The next chord is G major in open position. Now, let's look at the PDF file and find out which one of these voicing can be used. The top note, B, is out of the first register of the flute. The middle note, D, is in the third register of the bassoon. G, which is the low note of the chord, is out of the D sharp 4 and the F5 range of the bassoon. Since only one of the following three situations occurs in the chord, you can use either two bassoons and one flute, or one bassoon and two flutes. The G note will be played by the second bassoon in the delicate and medium power register. The D note played by the first bassoon also has a delicate timbre. This is a little bit weaker than the first one, but both bassoons are equal to each other. What about the flute path? The B note is at the beginning of the second register. This register has a soft timbre and a medium power like the second register of the bassoon. As you see, flute gains the power starting from A4. Thus, due to its medium power, one flute can be voiced against two bassoons. As the flute is in the second register through pianissimo, piano, mezzo forte, and the forte dynamics can be used. The pianissimo and fortissimo will be relative dynamics. As I said, we can use the second voicing as well. One bassoon and two flutes. This voicing is also well done. Just use it with soft dynamics. Don't write strong dynamics. The pianissimo and the mezzo forte will be relative. The next chord is D major in open position. Let's look at the PDF file and find out which one of the voicing can be used. Please write your answer in the comments below the video lecture. D minor is in the first inversion. Since the D note is not effective due to its thin and poor quality, you should replace it by second flute. This chord can be voiced with all true and relative dynamics. In fact, this type of open part harmony in the high range is not effective. I showed this example just to understand the register of both instruments. So, I want to stop our lessons as the bassoon's fourth register is not effective in chord voicing. At the end of this lecture, we can arrive at this conclusion. Both flute and bassoon gradually lose their thickness ascending from low to very high register. Flute gains the power as it ascends. On the contrary, bassoon loses the strength as it goes from low to very high. All registers of the flute can be used in chord voicing. All bassoon's registers are usable in chord voicing except the fourth register. Depending on registers, all true pianissimo, piano, mezzo forte, forte, and the relative pianissimo, fortissimo dynamics can be used. Open and closed three-part harmony can be played by either two bassoons and one flute, or one bassoon and two flutes, with the exception of some situations. When at least two of the following three situations occur at the same time, one bassoon and two flutes must be used in voicing. If the top note of the chord is in the first register of the flute, if the middle note of the chord is in the third or fourth register of the bassoon, if the low note of the chord is between the D sharp 4 and the F5 range of the bassoon. So, we have done our lecture. If you like this lecture, please join to our orchestration course and learn more orchestration techniques. This course consists of 3 parts. Part 1, Orchestral Chord Voicing. In this part you will learn how to voice 3, 4, 5 and several parts harmony between woodwinds, brass and the string section. Part 2, Orchestral Texture Making. This part will be included lectures about how to find best register for solo instruments, how to use unison and active doublings, how to make orchestral texture using different methods, how to work with small ensemble, and full orchestra. Part 3, Orchestral Effects. In this part you will learn how to make orchestral effects, chords, melodies in a different genre such as comedy, drama, romantic, horror, story and so on. During the course you will get new weekly lectures, PDF files and assignments. Thanks for watching. Bye for now.